Let's keep it going. The Curator. Holy shit, that's an intense ass name. Go.
Tell me about the whistles.
The whistles go.
It sounds like what?
When you want to woo woo, it's that woo woo. You know what I'm saying? Then you got the flow, 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 flow.
Let's go.
You got the flow, flow.
Don't overthink shit, don't overthink shit, don't overthink shit. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Luke, aka The Curator, and welcome to my first ever video regarding this beat right here, which I made for the first ever 24-hour beat battle hosted by Kenny Beats. As I said, this is my first video, and I'm actually recording this introduction after I recorded the rest of my video, because it took me a while to learn how to talk to myself. And anyway, so you're probably going to notice me ramping up how good I am at it over the course of the video, and it's going to take me a second. So after this, excuse it, but I hope you learned something from this. I hope you enjoy it. I had a lot of fun doing it. Please enjoy. First of all, thanks to everybody who voted for me. I really appreciate it. Getting my beat on the stream at all was more than I could have asked for my first time attempting. And seeing Kenny and Alex listen to, let alone enjoy my beat, was a win enough for me. So hopefully you guys are going to catch me on some more of those lineups in future beat battle streams. Anyway, I've been pretty excited to talk about this beat and break it down for you guys, because I think there's a lot of good examples of core concepts that are integral to getting this sound that I think a lot of us are working on right now. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about big picture stuff and thought process, but most of all, I want to structure this breakdown based upon those specific subjects that I think are most important and most practical for you guys. So some of those bigger topics I'm going to be focused on are drum processing, then specifically snares, swing, some mixing stuff in terms of layering sounds, and then I want to talk about some things that I wish I had done in the first place, or some things that I would change. But anyway, our discussion's probably not going to be limited to just those things. I'm sure some things will come up as we go. So to get started, let's listen to the secret ingredient sample that we were provided with. In this case, it's a two-parter, like I said.
For almost a mile.
Nope, that was the wrong sample. Here's the real one. So the very first thing I did once I got the samples was extract as much MIDI out of them as I could, because chances are that'll come in handy later when you want to pad or surround the sample with other instruments that are just using the same chords or same melody. So the way you do that is you right click on a audio sample, and then you convert harmony to new MIDI track if you want to get chords. So I already did that, and the MIDI showed up right here. And then for this sample, I ended up using the melody from it. And so in this case, I right clicked and hit convert melody, and then I just put them both right here. So what happens is this sample is pretty wet with a bunch of different effects on it and stuff. So it's not that easy for the program to extrapolate the chords like on time or anything. So you pretty much have to go through, and if you wanted to use the exact chords, you would have to estimate where the chord change happens, and then take out all of the notes that don't fit, and you kind of have to use your ear. Some samples work way better using this tactic, because there will be less extra shit in there that is like clouding the program that is separating out the chords. Anyway, I didn't really end up using These chords, I just started this way because I felt like I might be doing it that way. What I did use, and this is kind of the same story with the melody, like, as you can see, this is pretty broken up and it doesn't follow exactly. So like this lower note doesn't belong. It's not necessary. So what you'll end up doing is to just like stretch out the notes that fit the way that you think they should. So this is the melody that I ended up using. So you get the idea, I think. So I think one of the biggest conversations in terms of sample-based production, especially in the context of a competition where you're meant to use a sample, is how much of the sample are you using and how obvious is it that you're using the sample? So like I started saying, when I started out, I was using one of the samples just to extract like a lead. So what you could do is you could make, let's say, a sampler patch in MIDI and put one of the audio samples that you're using into the sampler. And then what you can do is end up chopping a tiny ass little piece to make it a pluck or something. So you're using the sample, but you're not like keeping so much of the character that exists in the entire thing. So my point is that you could be using a sample without anybody realizing what sample it is, just because of how little of it you're using or how many effects you put onto it or how insignificant it is in the context of your entire song. Anyway, if not that we're really going to be talking about this, but if you wanted to take a sample and be able to play it like an instrument, like I'm kind of talking about, the main issue is that you're going to want to tune it. So let's say you don't know what key the sample is in, you put it into a sampler, and then you start playing on your keyboard and play middle C, and we see that we have an A here, and there's a bunch of little cents. That's right. That's what they're called. So anyway, you're not only going to need to be, and also, I don't know why I picked a sampler. It should be a simpler. Anyway, so to start tuning, you're going to look at your tuner. We need to go up from an A to a C because I'm playing a C. And then we need to go down 30 cents. Now we're right on the money, so you can basically play that portion of the sample on your keyboard knowing that it's actually playing the note that you're hitting. So anyway, going this route of kind of playing the sample and not using that much of it, like I didn't know how much of the rest of the sample I was going to be incorporating. My beat was like pretty barren and I was just trying to be too fancy with it. I ended up being pretty uninspired, so honestly, I think my next idea started when I was just listening to this part of the sample with my brother, and we realized that it sounded like Bub Rub.
Well, you want to
And so that's where I started the infamous meme buildup at the beginning.
The whistles go.
It sounds like what?
Well, you want to it's that woo.
So that's when I just started feeling it. So once I chopped up my Bub Rub intro and liked it, I started messing with the sample again to see what else I could do with it. So I ended up pitching it down an octave. And the way you do that, if you didn't know, is you click the transpose knob down here by your sample and you shift arrow key. So shift up arrow key takes it back to its original format right here. And then if I do it again with a shift down arrow key, it stretches it twice its original size and makes it an octave lower. So now it sounds like this. Then I wanted to start building my intro with some 808s. So now the horn plus 808 sounds like this. Then I also had this vocal technique in mind, which I actually think about using a lot, which I learned from Bass Nectar, and it involves continuing a vocal over a drop via delay, but in this case I just duplicated it to replicate what a delay sounds like. And I think it's just badass when you like let the original vocal flow into the drop. So the way it sounds like now, including Bub Rub and my drums and the flute.
It's that woo woo. You know what I'm saying? Then you got the flow, 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 flow.
So then the last layer that I decided I needed was this kind of oriental-ish pluck that I found in Omnisphere and then processed it as such. I'll go into some of that later. So now my intro sounds like this.
It's that woo woo. You know what I'm saying? Then you got the flow, 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 flow.
So now we're getting into territory of actually being happy with how I'm using the sample because of how recognizable I've made it. So like I start out teasing it twice in the Bub Rub intro.
It sounds like what?
When you want to woo woo.
And then I tie it
It's
in.
that woo woo. You know what I'm saying?
And then right when the beat hits, you realize that I've pitched it down into a new vibe of its original self.
Flow, 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 flow.
And I think that's pretty epic when you recognize what sample is being used, especially if you're somebody who was working on it as well. It's like, oh, there it is, but it's new now, and it's been flipped in a different direction. So then what I did from there is I started building some drums. So I have taken out the 808 after a couple bars, and I use this sub drop because I wanted to like fade out the bass.
Flow, 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 flow.
And this pluck is gradually increasing in volume. So I use this gong to start a new phrase as the sub drop hits, and that's when I start these hi-hats, this perk, and then a little OG snare trap build. So I think hi-hats are a great way to start introducing like a rhythmic drum element in kind of a build-up fashion without being as harsh as, say, like a trap snare like I have going on in the next little phrase. So this is kind of a two-part build-up. It has this very first element of kind of a atmospheric slowdown. So now there are two more important elements that contribute to the final riser effect of the second half of the build-up, and that is this trap snare build and another part of the sample that Kenny gave me, which I've reversed and made into this like riser that complements the rest of the build-up, and it sounds like this. So the way that it kind of changes in pitch and intensity on the way up makes for this moment right here where my first snare hits that then provides time for this pause right here that goes into the drop, which is on this bar right here. So that's going to sound like this.
You got the flow, flow, flow.
So I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about Clappington, which originally I thought was going to be a clap. Obviously, it turned out to be a snare. So the snare ended up being two layers. This one is deactivated, and I didn't end up using it. So here's what they sound like together. And here's what each one sounds like individually. Here's the first one, which is a decap snare, which is really nice on its own already. And here is another decap snare. And together, I think they sound awesome. So let's talk some details on how I mix these snares. First of all, they're in their own little subgroup within the larger drum group. So that way I can process just these two layers together. So I have an EQ that's cutting out uber lows and then putting some chunky boosts that I just felt like I liked. A lot of people who think that they're probably following rules when it comes to mixing a drum like a snare is probably cutting higher up. I prefer for my snares to smack pretty hard, so I like to keep a lot of their meat in them. Speaking of smacking, I also have a soft clipper on this snare group, even though I have another one on the larger drum group. This is a plugin called Event Horizon, which I might do. In fact, I'll probably do another video on it because I think soft clipping is kind of a big deal right now. Aside from the clipper and EQ, what else I have going on is this imager that I made, which basically takes the free Ozone imager and turns it into 3 versions of it that only affect certain bands of frequency, so that way you can set the stereo image of highs, mids, and lows separately. I'll send you guys to the details on that so you guys can make one for yourself, because it saves you a lot of money. A plugin that will do this out of the box will cost you a lot of money. Now I have a compressor which is sidechained to the kick. So I think this is a topic that I've been kind of mystified about for a long time, and I only just recently started figuring it out for myself. I would, for the longest time, hear those super drum heavy, swingy hip-hop / dance songs, a la Kaytranada, and think to myself that there was something mysterious going on within the drums. Like, I would notice these clicks and crunchy noises within the percussion, which I always assumed were like meticulously chopped and placed samples or something, but what I think it is now is the combination of soft clipping, swing, and sidechaining percussion to other percussive elements, probably the kick mainly, and that's what I did here. So I mentioned my sidechain from the snare to the kick, which results in duck on whenever the snare and kick play together. So here's the difference between a snare by itself, and here are the snares that are playing at the same time as these kicks. So I don't know if you can hear the minute difference between the two volumes, but when the kicks are playing together, I think you'll be able to hear the crunch that happens because of only the very beginning of these snares playing over the kick. So that's the beginning of this percussion variation that you can mess around with via sidechaining. So like you can hear it also within these hi-hats. And actually the hi-hat sidechain compression is more extreme than I had on the claps. The claps have minus 12 dB and the hi-hats have minus 22, so almost twice as much, and you'll be able to hear even more crunch that's happening within the hi-hats during the kicks. So the difference between the hi-hats with and without the compression is going to be pretty obvious. So I'm going to disable this one, which is sidechain to the kick. This is sidechain to the clap. I'll get to that in a second. So listen. And when I engage the sidechain from the kick, you'll hear lots of these hi-hats start crunching. So the tiny little bit of hi-hat that you hear before it's ducked from the sidechain is this percussive variation that I'm talking about. And I'm a big fan of it. I really like how it creates this new flow. So if you listen to, here's the thing, is you can vary the attack on this compressor and it'll make more of the, in this case, the hi-hat peek through before it's ducked from the sidechain element, which is the kick in this case. So listen as I change the, it was at 2 milliseconds default. As I change the attack on this compressor, more of the hi-hat will peek through. See how now you can basically hear the whole thing when I go back down. The tiny little transient peeks out, which I think sounds really cool within the context of the drums. So let me just play the drums right now the way they are. So you can hear how the hi-hats shift in and out of focus based on whether or not they're sidechained, and I think that's a cool way of varying them and creating this flowy experience where different elements come in and out of focus. So you can see that I have two instances of hi-hats. They're slightly different. They might actually... So, okay, they're from a different loop. These are both from the Count. If you haven't already, go check out the Count. His samples are pretty life-changing, not gonna lie. Another thing about these hi-hats is that they're each panned differently. First one is panned. I had it at 8 to the, or 7 to the left. Doesn't fucking matter. It's so close anyway. What that ends up doing is causing this like play minorly, because they're not panned that hard, but like it's back and forth, left and right, and creates this atmosphere of change because they're kind of going in and out of each other on each side. So listen to kind of how that sounds. So I like how they both play at the same time sometimes, and play when the other one's not playing it sometimes. It's kind of like a little dirty. It's a little dirtiness. I think kind of the coolest music now involves a lot less cleanliness. I kind of want things to be delayed at weird times from each other and create like a little bit of a mess, because it's more interesting that way. So I'm doing a little bit of that here because I'm having shit play at the same time. But Alex Tumay said they're not that interesting at all. So, take that for what it's worth. So another hat that I have is, this is the last bit of metal that's on, this side. These open hats kind of tie it all together for me. They're one of my favorite parts of a drum groove. Here's what they sound like. And I think these are slightly different, although they sound quite similar. Yeah, they're different samples, but maybe the same symbol. So going back to the soft clipping idea, I really love the way that these kind of distort when a lot of other shit is going on, and they're getting clipped, and they're getting distorted from the drum bus that's on this channel, so yeah, I guess I forgot to mention, I should have by now, that on this bigger drum group, I have a drum bus, which is doing a little bit too much. I wish the settings weren't quite this high, but that's something I would change later. And then I have Event Horizon clipping on this again as well. And so yeah, whenever you guys get the free version of Event Horizon, it's going to make your shit like offbeat, so you have to like fuck with it a little bit to make it change. Yeah, now it's probably back to normal. Nope. There it is. Okay, so let me see if you guys can tell the distortion that I'm talking about on these hats, because it requires everything else playing, the way that it's getting compressed and distorted. So this one's not really playing in the middle of shit, and then this one is. Okay, so sorry about that. This is what happens when Event Horizon is off. I can tell that my claps were fucked up, so now I have to fix it. Okay, now it'll sound right.
Flow.
Anyway, I might need my mastering chain on. Let's see if Ableton won't crash this time I try to turn it on. It did last time. So I bet you can hear more distortion now that my mastering's on.
Flow.
I love the extra crunch that all that shit adds. I'll go through my mastering later on. Probably not that specifically in this video, but I'll go through it in depth some other time. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce my CPU load and turn off mastering right now. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is how I've introduced swing to my beat. The basics of swinging your shit, if you didn't already know, revolves around your hi-hat and snare timing. So if you didn't know, report a crash. Which one? If you didn't know, there is this extra window over on your over on this side where your tracks are with this D. If you click the D, which stands for delay, you then bring up all of these options for each track, and that is where your track sits in time. So 0 milliseconds on this kick right here means that it's right on the grid. And then 6 milliseconds for my hi-hats means that these are 6 milliseconds ahead of the grid. Now, this loop is probably already swung a little bit. I mean, they look like they're on the grid, but you know what I mean. So these hats are swung. I could have gone even farther. I should have, in fact. But these are 6 milliseconds late. These hi-hat, the open hats are 12 milliseconds late, and then these claps individually you can see on each track here. These are 12 milliseconds early. This one's 13 milliseconds early, and then as a group, I just nudged them a little bit more, 5 milliseconds early. It's hard to explain the feeling that you get when this happens. Obviously, the fact is that the snare's coming earlier than the beat, and these hi-hats are coming later, but it's like, you know, what some of us refer to as drunk. It's a drunk sound, or it's a swingy, pocketed sound. That's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about groove. Obviously, in MIDI, you can, you know, access grooves from Ableton, but that's just like adding you could do everything in MIDI and add the same groove to every MIDI track or whatever, but I like doing it this way. I like using these delay channels. So the basics of, you know, and you can create different extremities of the same effect, or you can create different specific pockets by tweaking this to your liking, but the basics of it is kick is on 0, hi-hats are late, and then your snare's early. And then another thing, and then my bass is all on beat. And then lots of melodics I fuck with too. Like my pluck, you know, I drew these off grid, of course, and then I made them a little bit late. I kept my vocals on grid. I made my my chords a little bit late as well, just because, you know, my drums are gonna hit a little late, so I'm making it fit. And then same with these keys, I made them a little bit late, and this melody I just kept on 0, but I fucked with it inside the MIDI grid. One other thing I'll mention is that with these delays, this is how you can create like a multi-layer snare or clap. So like if, let's say you have 3 claps, you make one way earlier. So you make one, 19 milliseconds, then you make one 13 milliseconds early, and then you make one 10 milliseconds early. That creates this like multi-layered clap that would sound like, you know, multiple people are clapping or whatever. So let's see how this one sounds. If I can't really tell, but that's just because of the types of samples we're using. Anyway, so that's a tip that you can mess around with, is just fuck with your delays until they sound cool and interesting, because having your shit on a grid is an easy way to have a short-lived BeatStars career. So the next thing I'll talk about is, real quick, you can tell that I did the same vocal thing again on this reel drop. So I kind of like faked out the build up here. Then I bring my clap in to tease the full effect of my drums right before they all hit right here. And then I also create a false start on the one beat not having a kick and starting with this hat to clap. So like I let the Bub Rub sample signify the one beat, and then the clap comes in, and then all these chords and the rest of the drums hit. So let's see how that sounds real quick. So I love these like fake outs on the one beat to where your beat doesn't hit full until, let's say the clap or like your second kick when the 808s kick in. This is common practice, but there are better ways to do it than others. So I'll talk about some other instances of that. Like in the second drop over here, I also have a crash, which signifies the one beat. I think it sounds pretty dope. So just real quick, I'll show you.
You got the flow.
So again, I don't have a kick. I have this like fake out space where there's just a crash, and then everything comes in after the clap and the rest of the hats come in. It's badass. So I'll talk about the chords now. What I did was, for anybody who doesn't already know this and who doesn't know classical music theory, I just have a folder of chords, which they might be obstructed by my face over there in the corner, but I have a folder of, you could probably see most of this, chords and scales, which, it's probably not hard to look up, but if anybody needs a direct hookup, I'll send it to you. There's just this folder of all the MIDI of different scales, and then all the basic chord triads that are in each scale. So this scale, if I remember correctly, is E minor. And I just found that out by, tuning the sample. And I think back to that real quick, I took these and I actually detuned them by a few cents, even though I just took it down a whole octave. I still dialed it in so that way, because like, let's say your sample's in a certain key, but it's off by 30 cents. Technically, it's going to be off key of any other instrument you have that is going to be tuned. So if you're using a sample that has a certain tune relative to all the samples that you already have that are in perfect tune, it's going to sound whack. So I detuned it a little bit to get it on the right tune, because who knows what fucking tape machine or whatever this went through to make it a slightly different pitch than a certain key. Anyway, so I basically used my ear to figure out what chords were going with my pluck melody that I made up, which I believe acts as my Lebowski rug. It really ties the room together. But I basically went through and picked which chords I thought felt right based on the 808s that I kind of had started, and it just happened for me. I didn't think too much about it. Yeah, and going back to the way that I use the sample, if you can't tell already, I basically used it as this like background pad. Like, it doesn't change in pitch at all. It just provides this atmosphere, and then like the atmosphere gets expanded whenever I put these chords in. So again, I stall. I have the horn effect playing the whole time on this build-up, and then on my stall, I don't have it in until I want that last or that next kick to hit, and that's when all the chords come in and stuff. So it's just like providing this atmospheric pad, and I think so. This is, so many of you guys I know this trick, but this is what's called a Haas effect, which is when you when something hits you first on one side of your head, it sounds like it's coming from a wider direction. And so, terrible explanation, but I think most of you know what I mean. So basically, this is a 100% wet delay with zero feedback, and it's causing the stereo image to widen on this sample. So I'm just going to show you with and without it. And I know this is basic shit for a lot of you guys, but I just want to make sure everyone knows this because I'm kind of covering it from the ground up here. It's fun for me. So this is what it sounds like. You hear how it's in the middle of everything, and now it's wide. So if you haven't used that before, start using it because it's huge, pretty essential. What I think I forgot to mention earlier is that I use this in two different ways. So on one of my claps, I have it disabled, not using it, or snare, excuse me again. And then another, on my second layer, I have it stereo. So when you listen to individual snares I have here, this one's in the middle and this one's wide. And the combination of those two results in one snare in the middle and one snare wide. And this is a trick that I actually took from Max Chapman, a tech house guy. I used to make a lot of house. You put a meaty snare in the middle and a more interesting snare on the sides. So that's pretty much what I did here, even though you can't necessarily classify these as whatever. But, let's say you have a snare with a long reverb tail or something. You would put that on your stereo side, and it'll sound more interesting that way. And then you have the punch of your meaty snare in the middle, and then you have more interesting information on the sides. I apologize for being so out of order on this video. I have a lot of stuff I want to go back and talk about now, but we'll see how it goes. So I think you guys get the gist on the chords here. And the theory is, as well as I do. Let's put it that way. So I just did what I felt was right on that. And then I added some sevenths and shit. And then, one technique to use is kind of have in mind like which direction you want to go in, because that's kind of all it's about, is like starting somewhere and then either going up or down from it. And you can cause that illusion even if the chords themselves, the original form of the chords, weren't going up or down. You can create inversions that create the illusion of a chord going up or down. So I forget how, this is an inversion where it started out going up, but I wanted it to go down. So I changed the top note to make it an octave lower, and now the chord goes down. And then I decided to make this one go back up and then this one go up again. So if you haven't noticed yet, this is a recorder, like a fluty recorder sample that is made into these chords by just having three of the same sample go at different pitches. And then I have strings underneath them or just mixed in with them to add some more to it. So I'll get into that. So the recorder, flute sounds like this. And then I love strings, so I had to try it out, and it worked. So the recorder acted like kind of the meat of the chords, and then the strings acted as more of the air and space of the chords. So this is what the strings sound like by themselves. So as you can see, they're the same chords, but I added some sevenths and maybe fucked with the inversions a little bit. So the way these are mixed is, like I said, the focus of these, the recorder chords, is that these are the meat of the chords. So if I open my EQ, okay, pretty chunky. Maybe this isn't illustrating what I wanted it to. Again, I have these, stereo widened, and then sidechain from the kick and the clap, and then this wouldn't be Kenny Beats related at all if it didn't have RC20 on it. So anyway, let's see about these strings, because I want to compare the EQs. So they're about the same. This would be probably an area that I would want to fix my mix in. I would want to, because I said the recorder focuses on my meat of the chords and the strings focus more on my air. what I would probably want to do is EQ highs out of the recorder chords, and then EQ some more lows out of the string chords, because I would want the focus to be on the highs of the strings and the lower mids of the recorder chords. This notch right here that I have in both of them was meant to make room for the flute that I bring in later, which is what I talked about earlier, where I got the melody from the sample from MIDI. So that's what this is, I think. Yeah. So what I ended up doing is playing that recorder again with the melody that comes from the sample from the beat battle. So that's what this is. And what I decided was that this was the frequency range that this lead was going to occupy. So I cut out that notch of both of these EQs. The other thing is, okay, real quick, I'll mention this. I have a utility on here. What I've got in the habit of doing recently is using utility to automate gain instead of using the mixing gain right here to automate it. So instead of going in here and creating an automation lane for the gain on the channel, it's better to do it with utility. So, let's say you didn't know how to do it, you would go to utility and then modulate the gain right here. The reason is because later when you're mixing, you can keep that same gradient in, or you can keep the same, automation effect that you have going on, but you can mix using this fader right here without having to, what I used to do was have to highlight my entire automation and click it like this to mix, but it's so much simpler to use utility to do that and then mix with this fader right here. So the next thing is that I used this auto filter effect. Shout out Misogi. I learned from Misogi. So this is what happens. I use this like filter sweep, this quick filter sweep, automated. So this is what it looks like, to just use as a fill and like a transition to the next phrase. So here it is again in context. So then what I'm doing is another trick that some of you guys might not know. To create a vinyl stop on your entire track, or on any track for that matter, you use delay with repitch on it. So I have my master chain right here, and if I go to the delay plugin, here's my automation where I turn on delay for just this end transition part. So again, you might be able to hear everything come to a record stop, even though it might get blended in with the rest of the filter sweep. See if you can notice that. Yeah, so I think you can. What's happening is delay turns on, and then I'm automating the delay time with these synced. So this is what happens. I'm just going to override the automation and show you. When you fuck with the time, it'll create this warping effect that in this context sounds like a record stopping. So here's what you can, here's what it'll sound like. And I'll just turn this on. Anyway, so with the automation, I'm turning it on only right here because there's these weird tails that happen. So this is, if you want to do this, you engage it only for the amount of time that you want the effect to happen, and then you disengage it when you want your music to come back. And then for however long you want the record stop to take, you automate in this direction. So like, let's say I wanted the record stop to take these 2 beats long. I'll make it 2 beats long, and then I'll make delay active for 2 beats instead of 1. So now it sounds like this. So we'll undo that shit. So next up, I have started like a new idea by bringing in these key chords. And then I have brought back in the concept of melody from the sample, and the sample goes like, or the melody goes like this. So this was my way of like sucking out all of the music into this moment that is created by this new element of these like kind of airy keys, and then the melody, which is pretty dope, and kind of epic if I didn't say that word already. So this is what it sounds like. This is the transition. And then, so as I already went over, the filter sweeps that make that like fill. And then after the record stop happens, this cymbal hits for my transition into this new phrase. So this is what it sounds like. So I've made this even more bare to bring all the energy focused on just these 2 elements. Pretty simple. Then I bring back in my pluck melody. And then I bring in my perk again that starts kind of getting that percussive rhythm back on. Then I do a short snare build at the very end, and then I bring back in bub rub with a slightly new variation on it. So this is what that whole thing sounds like.
You know what I'm saying? You got the flow.
So the variation here is that it's basically the same drop as the first drop. The difference, as I showed you earlier, is there's a crash now on beat 1, which makes it a little bit more epic. The keys continue during the drop. Pretty heavy sidechain on there. I might have, changed that up if I had my druthers, because these keys were not as present as I would have liked them to be in this second drop. And then on top of that, the flute is continuing. So this is what I like to do, is build these different elements by not having them in certain areas and then having them in others. So like having this first drop, which is still dope, but doesn't have this more thought out melodic element to it, and then introducing it, and then having everything come back with new melodic content and the flute melody, which is like one of the main themes of the sample, I think is where it's at. Speaking of things that I would change though, if I were to make this better, the mix, especially on this second half, is pretty muddy because I have a lot of melodic shit going on. Like I have these keys, I have the strings, and the recorder again. And then the other thing is that I brought in another part of the sample, which I kind of like, but there should have been way better EQ on all this, because it just makes it really muddy and lots of it is unintelligible. The new part sounds like this. So it creates that like new, I don't know, counter melody is probably the wrong word because it's just on top of it. But it's creating this like descending vibe that goes on top of everything. I think it sounds cool, but in practice it made things kind of muddy because it was on top of like all the other melodic content. So what I should have done is focus on the melody rather than piling a bunch of layers on top, because it sounded kind of like shit. So, you know, even though this is like a new element and maybe kind of cool, maybe I would have just taken that out, and who knows, maybe I would have like eased back on the flute chords or whatever. So let me try to think about some more general shit that I can talk about. I bring in more hats in the second half, which I love. I love hi-hats, but I do my best to not use them too frequently, because when you do use them, I think it slaps way harder if you have a section when they're not being used. So like, as you can see, these two hats are not being used in the first drop. So like, I have more minimal drums over here, and then they're more complex. I think that's, I mean, especially when it comes to these like trap hi-hat roll style hats. Shout out to Uzi. This is a Uzi sample. Uzi needs more love, so you guys please give him some. So that's a part of variation. Like here's what these hats sound like, and then this is another like offbeat hi-hat. So just check this out. In context, here they are. I love having a roll right before the snare. I'm sure that's no mystery to a lot of you guys who produce as well, but I think it's like the obvious place to be putting trap hats. So on hi-hats, I use almost always micro shift. I didn't use it here. Oh, it's over here. This one's just dead. So what microshift is another stereo image plugin. It does basically what I was doing with the delay, except, you know, maybe in a slightly different way, and you can control the mix on it. So there's a lot of different settings on here for hats, and most drums that aren't that shouldn't be central, I use just a hint setting. The issue with this is that it adds lots of low end for some reason. So if I take off this EQ and sample these and solo these, you can hear this like low pitched click, this like clicky rattle. So I put my filters after microshift because it adds more information that needs to come out. So that's what's up with that, you know. Then I did it on the offbeat hat too, same-ish processing. And like I said, I didn't really touch on this specifically, but I have a compressor sidechain to kick and clap, snare, whatever, because I want my snare to stick out. I love having a loud in-your-face snare because it just emphasizes the drum groove more, and that's what you're getting when you're ducking. It's not, you know, it's not extreme. The settings on this sidechain compressor aren't crazy for the snare. A little bit more heavy on the kick because that's just natural. And then all you Kenny Beats homies out there know that his meme is that Kenny's not sidechaining 808s, except I have some sidechain going on because I knew that I would have a lot of kicks going on during the middle of an 808. I think it's less important to sidechain your 808 when you're only playing an 808 at the same time as a kick. But if you want your kick to punch through at the same time as an 808 that's playing, if you just let it ride, so like this 808's happening, and I'm not necessarily saying there's a kick there, but like if a kick happens in the middle, you want room for your kick. And so who knows, maybe the people who are saying don't sidechain them are only playing 808s and kicks at the same time. And in fact, one thing that, oh, by the way, these 808s follow the root note pattern of the chords that I picked. You want that shit to be in key. And then I have kind of a little like checkerboard going on here with this higher octave and then the lower octave. It's kind of like a tease into the lower bass, which sounds like this. So I think that's a cool tactic to like highlight the melodic part of the 808 and then bring in like the booming bass part of it. It really helps if your 808 is going to work that way because if you guys didn't know, higher octaves are going to be perceived as louder than lower ones. So sometimes you're going to have to process them very specifically in order to make it work. This sample just worked well for me. Let's see. It's a decap 808. So, in case you were wondering. And then a little bit about my bass processing. I forgot to mention it earlier. I have Renaissance bass going with a super low bass preset going on it. This is what it sounds like with and without it. Here's without. Here's with. You might not be able to tell it. It's this 47 hertz is going to be mainly shit that a sub is going to pick up, or if you have nice headphones on. Then I have Decapitator, another Soundtoys plugin that I put on like lots of shit, leads, basses, sometimes wetter than others. So here's the difference. A little bit fatter. Then I have another imager. Then I put a bit warmer, which is a Ableton saturator preset. I put on a lot of shit to brighten it up a little bit and make it a little louder. I have the imager going again. This is part of my like final mix process, which I'll just give you straight up. I basically have this preset here that shows me only stereo field content. So here's what it'll sound like. Pretty weird, but it's showing me, that's not it. It's showing me just what's in the stereo field. So when I mix down, I want everything in the stereo field to be just as balanced as it is when you're hearing it without isolating it. So what I'll do is I'll activate this to hear what's in stereo field, and then if something's not loud enough, I will make its stereo image more pronounced, so that way there's enough information in the stereo field to make it wide, interesting, and fat. Generally speaking, as you might know, you don't want that much low end in the side bands. What you want is maybe a little bit of ear bass in the side band, which just means the high low mids. That is what your ears would pick up of your bass. But other than that, you mainly want to focus on your highs being in stereo. Let's see. I hope you guys have noticed some things that I haven't talked about sufficiently, because I have gone super out of order here, and I want you guys to catch me and have me explain some things maybe that you're curious about. If I've missed anything, I'm trying to think if I've left anything else out. Basically, every single high-end piece of information I've made stereo wide, which I could have been a little bit more meticulous about, but I just slapped it on because I only had 24 hours, and if I had longer to mix, which I usually do, I take forever on my mixes because I'm a little bit too perfectionist. I might have fucked with the sideband a little bit more, made sure that focus was only on some very specific things, but like I said, there was a little bit of mud going on, which is fine. I'm still pretty happy with the result, but but that's what's up. And, you know, I put another Uzi sample shout out. I put some basic risers. Usually I would process these a little bit different. Usually I like to put a glue compressor to move it back in the mix and then sidechain it, but I didn't have any kicks going on. So whatever. Then I have this vinyl crackle going on. I honestly don't remember if this made it on the final mix because when I logged back in here, it was deactivated, but usually I'll put some vinyl noise. I mean, my master chain has a tape machine on it, so I'll get a little bit of noise anyway. Plus, I put RC20 on 6 different channels, so there's a shit ton of noise in there probably. But I usually put these on for a little bit of, I mean, if it's not a vinyl crackle, I'll put another similar noise behind my shit. And the way that you put it behind is, I don't see any, I mean, you want to take your lows out of anything that is not like a main instrument in your song, but usually I'd have a glue compressor with these kind of settings on it, low ass threshold to move it back. But it seemed to have been okay without that, so I didn't have one on. Maybe I didn't even use it, who knows. What else? Again, please let me know if you guys have any specific questions. Let me know if there's anything you want me to go in more depth about, because I want to make some videos specific about, you know, some of these concepts we talked about. And then anything else that you guys might have noticed or that you can think of that you want some more in-depth explanation on. I'm no expert, but I love to talk about it, so let's get to talking about it. I mentioned that I didn't want my drum bus so heavy earlier. I maybe would have rathered it be on like 50%, but this kind of like blown out vibe of having like super maxed out drums is like kind of cool. It goes back to what I was talking about with sloppy shit. Sloppy's pretty cool. You know, it's a way to be creative, because if people want to keep just doing the same thing over and over, lots of them are trying to be too clean and shit's just going to sound too normal. So, you know, soft clipping, making things pleasantly distorted is a lot of fun. So I recommend fucking around with the soft clippers. This is a great one to get, and I'm going to talk about it more soon, I'm sure. Man, I think that's about it. So, again, let me know what's up. Thanks, everybody, for your support. I've been meaning to start doing YouTube for a long time because I love talking about this shit, and this was a great start to it. Shout out to Memblem for being the original OG version of Kenny Beats Beat Battle star to YouTube sensation. You're an inspiration, bro. I appreciate you. Tell me what you think about my shit. What's up to the Discord. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the beat in general. I hope you enjoy the tutorial. I hope you learned something. Catch me on the future beat battles that are going to go down. Please like and subscribe. It's funny saying that. This is my first video ever, and I, just became a meme. But please do, because I plan on doing this a lot. I plan on getting better at it, and I plan on being of service to you guys in some way or another. So please help me make that a reality and give me some other shit to talk about in the comments and interact with me. Anyway, it was a blast making the beat. It was a blast talking about it. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Go.
Tell me about the whistles.
The whistles go.
It sounds like what?
When you want to woo woo, it's that woo woo. You know what I'm saying? Then you got the flow, 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 flow.
Let's go.
You got the flow, flow, flow. know what I'm saying?